So there's a group of frogs that were traveling in the forest. And they were traveling in a group, and they were just walking through the forest. And I don't know how they missed it, but there was this big old hole in the ground. And so at some point, as the group of frogs were walking, two of the frogs fell into this deep pit. Okay, and so the rest of the frogs are kind of surrounding the hole, and they're looking down into the hole, and they're like, oh no. And so the two frogs that were in the pit, they start jumping. They're jumping up and down as much as they could, trying to jump as high as they could, but they just couldn't get out of the pit. And being the good friends that the other ones around the edge were, they were looking down into the pit, and they were just saying, just give up. Just go ahead and die. You're not going to make it out. And the two that were in the pit, they didn't listen to this, but they kept jumping with all of their might, but they just couldn't get out. And their supposed friends are standing around the pit, and they just keep saying, just give up, just go ahead and die, end the misery now. And one of the poor frogs, he does. He gives up. And the frog just kind of lies down and just croaks, okay? Anyway, but the other one does not give up. The other one just keeps jumping. And lo and behold, it's amazing because this other one eventually jumps high enough to get out of the pit. And all these other frogs surround him. They're like, didn't you hear us? We were telling you just to give up. And we were telling you had no chance. And this frog that had made it out of the pit looks at him and says, guys, I'm deaf. And I'm not very good at lip reading. So when I saw all your commotion, I thought you guys were encouraging me. I thought you guys were telling me that I could make it out of the hole. Okay, now that's a silly story, okay? And yet last week, Pastor Rob started this little 2-week series on tongue-tied. And the main verse comes out of Proverbs chapter 18, verse 21. Now, don't look there yet. I would never, ever do this if I was the one last week and had preached and had given you homework. Okay, but Pastor Rob gave us some homework last week, and his homework was for us to memorize Proverbs chapter 18, verse 21. Now, again, I would never do this if it was me because I'm not sure you'd remember what I said like on Monday, but a whole week later after Pastor Rob, surely you guys did what you were asked to do, right? So Proverbs chapter 18, verse 21 says what? The power, or the tongue, I'm going to get it wrong myself, the tongue has the power of life and death. What else does it say? And those who love it will eat its fruit. Different versions say different things, but the first part there, the tongue has the power of life and death. And Pastor Rob was so kind to me to preach on the power of the tongue has in life last week, and he's left me to preach on the power of the tongue. The tongue has the power of death. Okay, but the tongue has incredible power to encourage people, to encourage someone to lift them up when they're down and to help them make it through a day. But our tongue also has the power to discourage somebody and to knock them down when they're already weak or to send them over the edge when they're already having a tough time. And as I think about this topic, I realize that you and I, mainly me, we should be more careful about the words that we speak. And be more careful about the things that we choose to say to the people in our lives and to the people whose lives we cross paths with. So today we're going to look at two main passages. The first one is in the New Testament in the book of James chapter 3. You could turn there right now. We're going to look at James chapter 3. And then we're going to look at an example in the Old Testament that I think really gives us a good example of James 3 in life. So if you need a Bible, we have some gentlemen coming down that are passing out some Bibles there, so just go ahead and raise your hand if you need one. But in James chapter 3, we're going to start in verse 3. James chapter 3, starting in verse 3. Says, when we put bits into the mouths of horses to make them obey us, we can turn the whole animal. Or take ships as an example. Although they are large and are driven by strong winds, they are steered by a very small rudder, wherever the pilot wants to go. Likewise, the tongue is a small part of the body, but it makes great boasts. Consider what a great forest is set on fire by a small spark. The tongue also is a fire, a world of evil among the parts of the body. It corrupts the whole person, sets the whole course of his life on fire, and is itself set on fire by hell. All kinds of animals, birds, reptiles, and creatures of the sea are being tamed and have been tamed by man. But no man can tame the tongue. It is a restless evil, full of deadly poison. With the tongue we praise our Lord and Father, and with it we curse men who have been made in God's likeness. Out of the same mouth come praise and cursing. My brothers, this should not be. Can both fresh water and salt water flow from the same spring? My brothers, can a fig tree bear olives, or a grapevine bear figs? Neither can a salt spring produce fresh water. You know, this passage in James chapter 3, there's three simple truths that I want us to notice today. The first one is this, and we've already been talking about this. We talked about it all last week. Our tongues are powerful. Our tongues are very powerful. Now, I'll be honest with you. Pastor Rob and I went to a golf tournament that we played in on Monday, and we spent the night at a hotel last Sunday night, and I challenged him on some of his facts, but the truth is the tongue is, on average, a little over 3 inches. I didn't believe that, and I challenged him on it, and he was right, okay? But our tongue is very powerful. You know, he also mentioned our core values, and one of our core values is life change. And the truth is our tongue has the power to help bring about life change in people's lives. You know, I started coming to school here in 1985. And I came to school here as a high school student. We had a high school up until sometime in the last 10 years, we had a high school. And so I started coming to school here in 1985 as a 10th grader. And it's so long ago now, I forget. But at some point in the next couple of years, I started coming to church. And I remember we had one of our associate pastors at the time, his name was Tom Moyers. And on Sunday mornings, he would sometimes walk up to a group of us high school guys who were standing there, and he'd, with his kind of goofy grin and his Midwestern tone, just kind of put his arms around some of us and say, you know what, y'all ought to be preachers, okay? And I think most of the guys in our group just kind of disregarded that. Like, no, thank you, you know. No, I would rather, you know, there's nothing I would rather do other than being up front. Like, I do not ever want to be up front talking or whatever. And so for a lot of people, I think they just ignored that, and that's fine. But for me, it kind of just struck a chord. Okay, like, maybe that's a good idea. So if you've ever wanted to know who to blame for having me around, you can blame him. Okay, because those words of his kind of stuck inside of me. And I was like, all right, well, maybe. Because as a little kid, I wanted to be a baseball player. And then I hurt my elbow, and I couldn't really throw the ball much anymore. And as I was in high school, I really wanted to play basketball. But I realized I had a big man's game and a little man's body, okay? And it just wasn't going to happen. Me and the Lakers were not going to work out. And so I was trying to think of something else. And so when he started saying that, I was like, wow, maybe that'll work. And so I went to Bible college. And as I was getting towards the end of Bible college, I spent the summer at his church working as an intern, which was a lot of fun. He was up in Oregon, spent the summer up there. And I remember one time, Tom just pulled me aside, and actually my buddy Greg was up there as well doing his internship, and Tom just sat me down, and I think he could see that I just kind of had some doubts in my head. Some doubts about whether I could do it, some doubts about whether it was the right thing for me. And honestly, I don't remember a single word that he said. But what I remember is his words of encouragement. And his words of he was basically just saying, you know what, John, you can do it. You can do it. You have the right. He wasn't saying you have the right talents. I had the right talents for it. He just said I had the right heart to do it. And so that encouragement meant so much to me because honestly, I was about to be a senior, you know, and if I was going to do something else, it was a little late almost. And yet those words of encouragement really were powerful for me. And so our tongues, our ability to say things to other people, there's incredible power in that. But in the incredible power of saying things that are positive, what James points out to us is not only are our tongues powerful, but our tongues are easily used for evil. Our tongues are easily used for evil. If you're like me, and maybe some of you are, it's easier to put people down than to say something encouraging. Now, and some of you, that doesn't even make sense. Like, that is not my wife at all. My wife is the most encouraging person you ever want to meet. Okay? But for some of us, we're so easily using our tongues to put people down and to mock them. And unfortunately for me, I feel like I was born with a quick wit and a sharp tongue. Now, my kids would question the quick wit part, but the sharp tongue is definitely true. I told you I went to school here and graduated 30 years ago. And just a couple years ago, I ran into one of my classmates, and she had told me that she'd run into one of our other classmates. And this was someone that we had not seen since the day of graduation. Like, it had been like 28 years, and we had not seen this young lady. And so the two of them talked, and unfortunately, this woman just was talking about how painful high school was for her, because she felt like all through high school, all she did was get picked on and put down. And so when my classmate told me about what this other classmate said, honestly, I felt really bad, because I'm pretty sure she didn't ever use my name in that conversation, but I know what we were like, and we were all very sarcastic. Now, we made fun of, everybody, including ourselves, but it just made me sad that there was someone 20-something years later that was still feeling the pain of stuff that had gone on in high school. That's the power in a negative way that our tongues have. And so, if we're not careful, we could use our words to destroy people. Like, most of you know who Bill Regan is, and you know that I like to mock Bill Regan, okay? Bill Regan personally enjoys mocking me as well. And it's okay. It's the relationship that we have. So when I say something to him, he doesn't take it personal. And when he says something to me, I go home and cry. Okay? No, I don't take it personally either. Okay? But just like 2 weeks ago, this just happened like 2 weeks ago. We were standing at the door out there, and I was making fun of Bill just like usual, and his sweet wife, Jan, was standing there. And I looked at her and I said, Jan, does it hurt your heart when I make fun of Bill? And I was being totally serious. I don't know if she knew I was being serious, but I was being serious because I was like, does it hurt your heart when I make fun of him? Because if it does, I will stop, okay? Because I would never want to hurt her. And so, matter of fact, not only did she say it doesn't hurt her, but she appreciated it and wanted me to do it more, okay? But the truth is, our words can be used to destroy. Our words can be like weapons of mass destruction. Our tongues can kill our marriages and can destroy our families. They can ruin friendships. They can divide churches. They can ruin our careers and dash other people's hopes. And I don't know if you noticed or not, but in verse 10, 6 of the most important words in that whole section of Scripture says in there, he says, my brothers, this should not be. The idea that we could come into church this morning and worship God and praise God and sing the songs that we sang, and then as we leave church, leave here, and then be using our words to put people down. That's what that verse is talking about. Coming here, we're praising God. Walking out, we're putting people down. We're saying things that are hurtful, saying things that are negative. James is saying, guys, that should not be. That's a lesson for all of us. That should not be in our lives. Instead, our words should be used instead of for evil. Our words should be like salve that's put on a wound. Now, salve is not a word that everybody uses anymore, and I use that word on purpose because in my house when I was a kid, there was this little jar of something. It was some kind of salve. I honestly don't even know what it is or what it was, and it's probably still sitting in my parents' cupboard to this day. Okay, but whenever something went wrong, whenever you had a rash or a cut or a scrape or anything, you put the salve on it. Okay, that salve was like the cure-all for everything. Okay, and so in people's lives, not that we can fix people or cure people, but our words ought to be like a salve, something that brings relief, something that brings soothing to other people. Our tongue should be things that we use to renew our marriages and bring our families together. They should be used to strengthen our friendships, and instead of disunity, bring unity in the church. The third thing it tells us in there is it tells us that our tongues cannot be tamed. Now, some of you might hear that. You might have read that and go, see, my tongue can't be tamed. Okay, I don't need to worry about this. James tells us I can't tame my tongue. Well, James also says this. In James chapter 1, verse 26, he says, if anyone considers himself religious and yet does not keep a tight rein on his tongue, he deceives himself, and his religion is worthless. Let me read that again, because that is such a powerful verse. That's a verse that I had to memorize a long time ago. If anyone considers himself religious and yet does not keep a tight rein on his tongue, he deceives himself, and his religion is worthless. we on our own cannot tame our tongue. We will never be perfect with our tongue. You won't be, and I certainly will never be perfect with our tongue. Last week, if you guys remember, I believe point number 1 in Pastor Rob's sermon was be aware. Okay? Be aware. And sometimes Pastor Rob, when he's talking, he'll say something like this, say, it has to be on our radar. Okay, well, that's really what this is all about. Okay, we will never be able to tame our tongue perfectly, but we have to be trying. We have to be giving it our best effort, knowing that we're going to fail sometimes. But it isn't assumed when we read, oh, you can't tame your tongue, I'm just going to give up, I'm not going to try. We read that and we go, you know what, I'm going to give it my best effort to control what I say. And when I mess up, I'm going to fess up and I'm going to ask for forgiveness. And I'm going to give it my very best effort. And you know what, most of us need, and this is for most of the problems we have in our lives, what we need is accountability. We need someone that will hold us accountable. Someone will say, you know what, the things that have been coming out of your mouth, maybe you should watch it. You know, like we all need those people, don't we? Someone who kind of keeps us in, like I told you, I feel like I've had a sharp tongue my whole life. And what that means is they're quite often I'm right on that line of saying something that's okay, and then boom, over here, like, oh, wait, that was too much. And so I need those people in my life that are like, hey, you know what, I don't think that's okay. You might have crossed the line there, or you definitely crossed the line there. That way it keeps me accountable. It keeps me on the right path. Because our words can be so damaging. So a long time ago, like 20-something years ago, I was helped run the children's ministry around here. It was called The Promised Land. Steve Benkert was doing it for a long time, and then I was working in there and doing stuff. And so I used to do this thing with this guy. I always named him Adam. I don't know why I named him Adam, but I always named him Adam, and we were talking about taming the tongue. And what I'd do is I'd give the paper to the kids, and I'd say, what I want you to do is I want you to say something negative about Adam, and then I want you to rip a piece of Adam off and just hold on to it. And so they would do it, and it's too big a crowd. I would let you, but it's too big a crowd. And I just had them say something negative and rip it off. And then after they were all done, ripping it off and saying something negative, I told them, I said, listen, I want you guys now to apologize to Adam, and I want you to say something nice about him and tape them back together. Okay? And so then they would always do their best to come up with something nice to say about him, and then they would tape him back together. And then generally speaking, this is kind of what he looked like afterwards. Well, what do you notice about him? Well, okay, let's be honest. He didn't look very good from the start, okay, because I drew him. Okay, but compared to from the start to now, like we all, when we use our tongue in a negative way to hurt people, we say things that hurt, and we say things that tear at them. And even when we say we're sorry, and when we try to make it right, guess what? We could tape them back together, but that wound has already happened. Okay, that wound is still there. And even if Adam forgives us for saying those things, this is still what he ends. I don't know if you guys can really see what he looks like, but he don't look very good. Okay? And that's what happens when we use our tongue. And so we need to be working hard to tame our tongue. I want us to look at an example of the power of the tongue in the Old Testament. If you have that Bible, go ahead and open it up to Numbers chapter 13. To Numbers chapter 13. The story that we're going to look at, it's actually found in both Numbers 13 and in Deuteronomy chapters 1 and 2. And so what's going on here is Israel, they've spent years in bondage in Egypt. And they've been oppressed. And they cry out to God, and God sends Moses, okay, to deliver them. But when when Moses goes to get them out of Egypt, if you remember, Pharaoh doesn't want to let them go. We have all the plagues. Pharaoh's heart is hardened. And it isn't until after the plague of the firstborn son when Pharaoh finally says, all right, go. Okay? And so Moses is leading the people out of the promised land. Pharaoh again changes his mind, starts to pursue them. God gets them through. Okay? We're familiar with the story. Takes them through the Red Sea on dry land. Israelites get to the other side. Sea closes up. The Egyptians are swimming. Okay? And then as they're going through the desert, okay, we read that God is providing food for them. So not only does he help them get out, but he's providing manna and he's providing quail for them to eat each and every day. And so at this point, if we've seen God do this, let's put ourselves in the Israelite situation right now. If I'm the Israelites, if we're the Israelites, should we not trust God at this point? Like, has God not proven himself to be faithful already? I feel like we should. I feel like we should trust God, because what happens in the passage that we're looking at, the Israelites come to Canaan. They come to the promised land. They're about to go into the promised land that God has promised them. And in chapter 13, verse 2, he says, send some men in. This is God talking to Moses. The Lord said to Moses, send some men to explore the land of Canaan, which I am giving to the Israelites. From each ancestral tribe, send one of its leaders. God is saying, hey, pick someone from each family, send them in to go take a look at the land that I am giving you. Is there any doubt in what God is saying? I mean, he's saying it like it's already decided, like it's already happened. To explore the land of Canaan, which I am giving to the Israelites. It's already set in stone. Okay, and so many of us, we know the story. The spies go in, they check it out, they come back, and in verse 26, this is what they say. It says, they came back to Moses and Aaron and the whole Israelite community at Kadesh in the desert of Paran. There, they reported to them and to the whole assembly and showed them the fruit of the land. They gave Moses this account. We went into the land which you sent us, and it does flow with milk and honey. Here is its fruit. But the people who live there are powerful, and the cities are fortified and very large. We even saw descendants of Anak there. The Amalekites live in the Negev. The Hittites, Jebusites, and Amorites live in the hill country, and the Canaanites live there, near the sea and along the Jordan. Then Caleb silenced the people before Moses and said, we should go up and take possession of the land, for we can certainly do it. But the men who had gone up with him said, we can't attack those people. They are stronger than we are. And they spread among the Israelites a bad report about the land they had explored. They said, the land we explored devours those living in it. All the people we saw there are of great size. We saw the Nephilim there. The descendants of Anak come from the Nephilim. We seemed like grasshoppers in our eyes, and we looked the same to them. God says to Moses, send some people in to look at the land that I am giving you. It's already happened. I'm giving it to you. These guys come back, and this is what they say. Oh, the land is great. The people are big. And the people are powerful. The cities are fortified. Now remember, God just told them to go check it out. But what they heard is, man, it's great land, but those people are too big. And the cities are too tough. Now remember, what did I just already talk about? These are the people that saw God bring them out of Egypt. He's already been walking with them. He's already been taking care of them. And yet they get in this situation, they're like, they're big and they're powerful. You know, we're not going to be able to make it. And 10 of those spies are like, no, we can't do it. And then we have Caleb over there. And I don't know what Joshua was doing at this point, okay? But Caleb is like, no, we can do it. We can do it. We can go and we can do this because God has said he will take care of us. Okay, we're going to continue in chapter 14, verse 1. It says, that night, all the people of the community raised their voices and wept aloud. All the Israelites grumbled against Moses and Aaron. Why are they crying? Why are they grumbling? Because they're listening to the 10. They're listening to those that are using their tongue for the power of death. Does that make sense? Like, that's why they're upset. That's why they're grumbling, because they've listened to the wrong people. They've listened to the wrong people. He says, and the whole assembly said to them, if only we had died in Egypt or in this desert. Why is the Lord bringing us to this land only to let us fall by the sword? Our wives and children would be taken as plunder. Wouldn't it be better for us to go back to Egypt? Now remember how bad they had in Egypt. Now, let's go back to Egypt. Great idea. And they said to each other, we should choose a leader and go back to Egypt. Then Moses and Aaron fell face down in front of the whole Israelite assembly gathered there. Joshua, son of Nun, and Caleb, son of somebody, who were among those who had explored the land, tore their clothes and said to their entire Israelite assembly, the land we passed through and explored is exceedingly good. If the Lord is pleased with us, He will lead us into that land, a land flowing with milk and honey, and will give it to us. Only do not rebel against the Lord, and do not be afraid of the people of the land, because we will swallow them up. Their protection is gone, but the Lord is with us. Do not be afraid of them. But the whole assembly talked about stoning them. Then the glory of the Lord appeared at the tent of meeting to all the Israelites. The words of the 10, if you think about what we read in there, in verse 1, the words of the 10 leads the people to despair. In verse 2, they're complaining. In verse 3, they're talking about rebellion. By the time we get to verse 10, they're talking about murdering, Moses and Aaron. Why is that? God has brought them out of Egypt. God has been feeding them all this time. God was prepared at this very moment to drive the Canaanites out of their land and give the land to the Israelites. But because of those negative words, it produced doubt. And that doubt led to them wandering in the desert. If we were to keep reading in there, God is having this conversation with Moses, and God's like, man, I'm just going to kill them all. God his patience is worn thin. And he's like, I'm just going to kill them all. And Moses seems to be that Moses talks God out of that. And so he's like, all right, what I'm going to do then is this. They're just going to have to wander. All the men of this generation, they're just going to wander in the desert. And so that was their punishment. Chapter 13, verse 2, this is the land I'm giving you. Chapter 14, you listen to the wrong people. You're going to have to wander until you die. So what should have happened? They should have trusted God. They should have listened to Caleb and Joshua. They should have entered the promised land, and they should have been blessed by God. That's what should have happened. What did happen? They listened to the 10 and they gave in to their fears. They wandered in the desert for about 40 years. That whole generation missed out on the promised land. They suffered unnecessarily. I hope as we think about this story, we can see the applications for us in our lives. First of all, for you and I, let's not be like the 10. Let's not be like the 10 in people's lives around us. I think about this, I think, hey, who are we listening to in our lives? Who are you listening to in your life? Are you listening to that person who's telling you can't do it, or you're not good enough, or God doesn't have a plan? I'm telling you this morning, do not listen to that person. Do not listen to them. Or are you listening to people like Caleb and Joshua? Because if they'd have listened to Caleb and Joshua, that would have brought about victory and blessings in their lives. Literally, a whole generation of Israelites died off because they were listening to someone who used the power of the tongue for death instead of for life. And then as we think about our own tongues, who are you? Who are you in the lives of the people around you? Who am I? Am I like the 10 or am I like the 2? Are you like the 10 or are you like the 2? I read this week from this rabbi, and his last name is impossible for me to pronounce, so I'm just going to call him Rabbi Joe, okay? Rabbi Joe said this. He said he's lectured around the country on the powerful and often negative impact of words. He's asked audience if they can go 24 hours without saying any unkind words about or to anybody. Okay, think about it for a second in your own mind. Could you go 24 hours without saying anything negative to someone or about someone? Just think about that for a second. I'll finish what he says. He says, invariably a minority of listeners, so very few of the people, will raise their hands signifying yes. Some will laugh, and quite a large number of people will always call out no. And then this is what he says. He responds by saying this, well, those who can't answer yes must recognize that you have a serious problem. Because if you can't go 24 hours without drinking liquor, you're addicted to alcohol and you're an alcoholic. If you can't go 24 hours without smoking, you're addicted to nicotine. Similarly, if you cannot go 24 hours without saying any unkind words about others, then you have lost control of your tongue. There's no area of life in which so many of us systematically violate the golden rule. Could we go 24 hours without saying anything negative to someone or about someone? So today, as we wrap this up, and as we wrap up this little 2-week series on tongue-tied, I want to encourage us to think before we speak. I want to encourage us to think before we speak. Last week, one of the verses that Pastor Rob shared was also in James chapter 1, and it said, "My brothers, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry, for man's anger does not bring about the righteous life that God desires." How often would our tongue be better used if we were quick to listen? Instead of being quick to speak, if we were quick to listen and slow to speak. So let's think before we speak. And I want you to think about this. In our lives when we're talking, as we think, is it true? Is what I'm about to say true? Is what I say helpful? Is it helpful? Is what I say inspiring to the people that are going to hear it? Is it necessary? Okay, is it necessary? And lastly, is it kind? Okay? The 5 letters in think. Is it true, helpful, inspiring, necessary, and kind? I just think the world would be such a better place if we all learned to live like that and speak like that.